Zahra Clare Baker was born on November 16, 1999, in the peaceful Australian city of Wagga Wagga, nestled in the heart of New South Wales. Her arrival was quiet and ordinary, a healthy baby girl to proud parents Emily Dietrich and Adam Baker. From the outside, there was little to suggest that her life would be anything but simple, shaped by the soft rhythms of a small farming community. But almost from the beginning, Zahra's story veered from the path of ease. Her parents were young, still navigating adulthood themselves, and their relationship quickly proved unstable. Within a year, they separated. Emily, struggling with postpartum depression, relinquished custody to Adam. It was not a dramatic courtroom battle, just a quiet decision made in the haze of exhaustion and despair. Zahra stayed with her father, and her mother drifted out of the picture. Despite the early fracture of his family, Adam Baker was determined to do right by his daughter. He worked long hours in sawmills and construction jobs, balancing grueling labor with the tender demands of fatherhood. Friends remembered him as reserved, but clearly devoted. Zahra, for her part, was a bright, affectionate child. She took easily to people, had a natural sweetness that softened even strangers, and radiated a quiet resilience that would come to define her. She was not yet 5 years old when her world changed again, this time more drastically. Zahra was diagnosed with bone cancer, a brutal illness for anyone, let alone a child barely out of toddlerhood. Treatments began immediately. Chemotherapy, hospital stays, the toxic grind of anti-cancer drugs, they became part of Zahra's new reality. Then came the amputation. Her left leg, devastated by the cancer, had to be removed below the knee. Recovery was slow. The pain was intense. But Zahra, even as a small child, bore it with astonishing courage. Nurses remembered her as unusually stoic for her age, rarely complaining, even when the nausea from the treatments made her too weak to sit up in bed. In time, she learned to walk with a prosthetic leg, awkward at first, but gradually steady. She returned to school with a noticeable limp and a different understanding of suffering. Then came another devastating blow. At age 7, Zahra was diagnosed with a second form of cancer, this time in her lungs. It was a cruel, almost unthinkable recurrence. Radiation and chemotherapy resumed. Over time, the treatments claimed another part of her hearing. Slowly, Zahra became deaf. She was fitted with hearing aids, but the damage was done. She was now a child with one leg, unable to hear the world around her. And still, she smiled. Her teachers would later say that Zahra was shy, but warm. She loved art. She loved being outside, even if it meant sitting on a bench while others played. She was never the center of attention, but she was beloved by those who knew her. Her classmates admired her without quite understanding the weight she carried. Her father, Adam, remained her constant. He brought her to appointments, fitted her prosthetics, and translated the world for her when her hearing failed. It was an unorthodox family, just a single parent and a girl with a million silent thoughts. But for a time, it was enough. Then, in 2007, Adam Baker met Elisa Fairchild online. Adam Baker was in his late 20s, living a quiet, working-class life in Giroux, Queensland. His world revolved almost entirely around Zahra. While others his age were navigating nightclubs, early careers, or relationships, Adam's nights were filled with school lunches, medication regimens, and nighttime feeds when Zahra was too sick to sleep alone. He didn't complain, but loneliness has a way of creeping in around the edges of even the strongest routines. One evening, Adam stumbled upon an online forum, not a dating site, but a casual space for chatting and connecting. There, he met a woman who introduced herself as Elisa Fairchild. She was American from North Carolina. Their early conversations were light, even playful. Elisa asked about Australia. She told Adam she'd always wanted to visit. When he mentioned Zahra, Elisa seemed genuinely curious. She asked questions about her condition, how he managed it all as a single father, and whether Zahra had hobbies. Adam was surprised by her attentiveness. The correspondence continued for months. Messages turned into emails, and emails into phone calls. Elisa sent photos, some of herself smiling with her own daughter, others of family gatherings, her home and pets. She said she had been divorced and was raising her child alone too. She seemed understanding of Adam's daily burdens in a way few others had been. She talked about starting over, hinted at wanting a new life, even mentioned how North Carolina was full of small towns, quiet places, slower days, not so different from Zahra's current life. Elisa offered a version of calm Adam didn't realize he craved. And for someone who had spent the last 7 years watching his daughter fight for her life, the idea of peace was magnetic. In early 2008, Adam began seriously considering a move to the United States. Elisa had invited him repeatedly, suggesting he visit first, meet her in person, and see whether their connection was real. It seemed too impulsive, too fast, but he was tired and hopeful. Against the concerns of some friends and family, and after weeks of planning, Adam and Zahra made their first trip to America that summer. The moment they arrived, the dynamic shifted. Though she presented herself online as nurturing and warm, in reality, Elisa had a long and troubled history. Multiple failed marriages, a record of petty crimes, past restraining orders, patterns of deception. But none of this was visible at first glance, certainly not to a foreign visitor unfamiliar with the systems in place to check someone's background. Elisa knew how to charm. She played the part of the sweet, attentive stepmother-to-be perfectly. To Zahra, she was kind at first, polite even. She decorated Zahra's new bedroom with pink curtains and soft bedding. She took her shopping for clothes. She said she wanted Zahra to feel at home. Zahra, hesitant but eager to please, tried to settle into the new house, a modest brick home in Hickory, North Carolina. It wasn't large, but it had a fenced backyard and a cozy porch. There were trees outside Zahra's window, and Elisa had even gotten her a puppy. It seemed promising. By early 2009, Adam and Elisa were married. The three of them were now a family. But once the honeymoon days passed, things began to change, slowly, subtly, and in ways only Zahra could truly feel. At first glance, Zahra's new life in North Carolina might have looked promising to an outsider. She was enrolled in public school. She had a cozy bedroom in Elisa's home, a dog, new clothes, a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood. On the surface, things appeared to be settling into a routine. But within the four walls of the Baker Fairchild home, something much different was unfolding. Once the marriage papers were signed and Adam returned to work full-time at a local tree trimming company, often gone for 10 to 12-hour shifts, Elisa began to exert quiet, absolute control over Zahra's daily life. She positioned herself as the final word on everything from Zahra's clothing to her food portions to her access to technology or social contact. In Adam's absence, Elisa transformed from nurturing to critical, from patient to cold. She wielded Zahra's dependence against her like a weapon. Zahra, still adapting to the United States and to life with a prosthetic limb and hearing aids, was uniquely vulnerable. She had no friends in Hickory. Her family, her biological mother and extended relatives were half a world away. Communication was already difficult due to her hearing loss, and Elisa knew this. She used that silence to isolate Zahra further. Discipline became increasingly harsh. What started as raised voices turned into long punishments, hours in her room without dinner, confiscated hearing aids, threats to send her away. If Zahra cried, Elisa told her she was being dramatic. If she tried to resist, the consequences escalated. There were no screaming matches, no broken dishes or punched walls. Elisa didn't explode. She eroded, little by little, stripping Zahra of comfort, of confidence, of voice. When Adam was home, things appeared normal. Zahra was quiet,
always watching Elisa for cues, trying not to say the wrong thing. Adam, exhausted from work and blind to what happened while he was away, accepted the facade. Elisa would offer casual complaints. Zahra had been moody. She was acting up. She didn't want to go to school. If Adam asked more questions, she steered the conversation elsewhere. She rarely raised her voice in front of him. The most visible signs of abuse came in the form of unexplained illnesses and repeated absences from school. In the span of just one school year, Zahra missed dozens of days. Elisa often cited flare-ups of Zahra's previous health issues, infections, low energy, or trouble with her prosthetic. The school, bound by limited resources and wary of questioning a parent too hard, accepted the excuses. There were no home visits, no red flags strong enough to trigger an in-depth welfare check. But the neighbors were noticing.
Some saw Zahra rarely, and when they did, she was never alone. Occasionally, she appeared with bruises on her arms or darkened patches beneath her eyes. One neighbor claimed to have heard shouting from the house during the day when Adam was at work. Another said she once saw Zahra standing in the backyard for nearly an hour, barefoot and unmoving, as though she was being punished. A few made calls, anonymous reports to child services, descriptions of a child who seemed too quiet, too often absent, possibly mistreated. One report specifically mentioned that Zahra appeared afraid of her stepmother. Social services did respond, but only in the most cursory of ways. A single home visit, a brief chat with Elisa, who, as always, seemed calm and cooperative. She told them Zahra had been through a lot medically, that she was fragile, sometimes defiant, that she had mood swings related to her medications. She showed school records, doctor notes, carefully curated documentation. The investigator left with no action taken. Zahra, meanwhile, was slowly disappearing inside herself. The girl who had faced chemotherapy, prosthetics, and deafness with quiet strength was now withdrawn, rarely smiling, rarely engaging in class when she did attend. Her teachers noticed but assumed her declining energy was medical. When asked if everything was okay at home, Zahra would nod, always nod, never complain. She had learned, somehow, that speaking up only made things worse. By mid-2010, Zahra Baker was just shy of her 11th birthday, but emotionally and physically, she carried the weariness of someone far older. Her small frame looked even smaller now, thinner, more fragile, as though whatever strength had once carried her through cancer treatments had been steadily drained from her. She was rarely seen outside the home anymore. Elisa had begun homeschooling her, at least according to what she told authorities and neighbors, but there were no official records of enrollment in any accredited homeschool program, no lesson plans filed, no academic tracking. In truth, Zahra's education had been quietly discontinued. Her days were spent inside the house, away from the eyes of teachers, administrators, and classmates who might have raised questions. Adam still left for work early in the mornings, returning late in the evenings. The longer hours, often tied to demanding jobs at tree service companies, meant that he was often exhausted and disengaged. He believed Zahra was being cared for while he worked. Elisa made sure he had no reason to think otherwise. But Elisa's parenting had morphed into something sinister. At some point during those months, Zahra was moved from her bedroom into an attic space, a small, poorly ventilated area above the main living quarters. The decision was never explained, and no one else was present to question it. The attic was cramped, often hot during the summer months, and barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a single sheet, a small bag of her belongings. Neighbors would later say that Elisa treated Zahra like a burden, not a child. She made snide comments about her prosthetic leg, mocked her hearing aids, and referred to her as slow. When asked why Zahra wasn't seen anymore, Elisa gave cold, dismissive replies. She's sick, she doesn't want to come out, she's moody, hormonal. But behind closed doors, the abuse was no longer just emotional or neglectful. It was physical. Zahra endured harsh punishments for perceived slights, being too slow to come downstairs, forgetting to clean a dish properly, not responding quickly enough to instructions she could barely hear without her devices. Those hearing aids were frequently taken away. There was no one Zahra could confide in.
Her calls, if she was even allowed to make them, were brief and closely monitored. She hadn't seen her mother since infancy. In Australia, extended family members assumed she was being cared for, loved, protected. There had been a few social media posts with smiling family portraits, and no reason, they thought, to question them. But behind the lens, Zahra's smile was fading. As summer turned to fall in 2010, the household became increasingly secretive. The family moved frequently, staying with Elisa's relatives, then into a rented home in Hickory. Each move was another layer of insulation, a way to avoid questions, to reset suspicions, to erase any physical evidence of prior abuse. And then came a moment that no one who encountered it could quite forget. On September 25, 2010, a fire broke out in the family's backyard. A rented vehicle, a Chevy Tahoe owned by Adam's employer, had been set ablaze near the home. Police were called, and the family reported the incident as an act of vandalism. But when investigators arrived and began processing the scene, something strange happened. Within minutes of the fire being reported, a second 911 call came in. Elisa reported that someone had kidnapped Zahra. She claimed that a man, possibly connected to the earlier fire, had broken in and taken her stepdaughter. She was vague about the timeline. Her answers stuttered and inconsistent. Adam, upon being informed, seemed confused. Not only had he not seen Zahra that day, he wasn't even aware she was missing. Police responded swiftly. A local Amber Alert was issued. Flyers were printed, roadblocks were placed, but almost immediately, the story didn't add up. As officers questioned Elisa, her account shifted. The details became contradictory. First, she claimed Zahra had been taken overnight. Then she suggested she had last seen her that morning. When asked why she hadn't called sooner, Elisa said she wasn't sure what to do. Investigators found it odd that Adam, Zahra's father, hadn't seen his daughter in over 24 hours and hadn't thought to ask about her. But Adam's responses painted a more concerning picture. He believed Zahra had been grounded. He had been told she was being punished, kept upstairs. He hadn't questioned it.
It was only when police asked to search the home that the full weight of that silence began to fall. When officers arrived to search the Baker Fairchild residence, the house didn't immediately scream crime scene. It was modest, quiet, 2 stories with faded siding and overgrown hedges. Inside, the furniture was basic and functional. There were no overturned chairs or broken locks, no forced entry, no visible blood. But investigators were trained to look beyond disorder or neatness. What caught their attention was absence. Zahra wasn't there. Her bedroom, if it could still be called that, was in the attic. When officers climbed the narrow staircase leading up to the converted space, they found a bare, stiflingly hot room with no windows and no signs of recent use. The mattress was stripped. The air was stale, thick. There were no toys, no clothes, no books, only the faint smell of mildew and sweat soaked into the insulation. It felt like a storage space, not a child's sanctuary. In the main house, officers asked Elisa if Zahra had any recent photos. She hesitated, then produced a printed image from months earlier, Zahra smiling with her hearing aids in and her prosthetic leg partially visible. But the photo seemed outdated, and she had no recent schoolwork, no drawings, no fresh clothing or toiletries that indicated an 11-year-old girl had been living there up until the past few days. Then came a deeper concern. Zahra hadn't been seen by anyone in weeks. No teachers, no neighbors, no friends. Not even Adam could recall the last time he'd had a real interaction with her. When pressed, he admitted that he had stopped seeing Zahra regularly due to Elisa's claims that she was being disciplined upstairs. He'd believed she was simply grounded, as children often are, and that it wasn't his place to interfere with Elisa's parenting decisions. That lack of curiosity would later haunt him. Investigators took statements, but alarm bells were ringing, not just because of the inconsistencies, but because the entire situation felt manufactured. The burned-out vehicle outside, initially reported as a vandalism incident, was reclassified as suspicious. Inside the car, investigators found a note,
one scrawled in shaky handwriting riddled with misspellings, threatening to harm the child if the police got involved. But the note seemed deliberately placed, as if intended to create a diversion. Then came the discovery that shifted the entire trajectory of the case. In the home's washer and dryer, forensic technicians uncovered clothing, girls' clothes, that had recently been washed with heavy detergent. One of the garments tested positive for traces of blood. It wasn't a large stain, just a faded smear, almost erased, but it was enough. Elisa was questioned again that evening. Her answers, once erratic, now became outright bizarre. She claimed she was being set up, that someone was trying to frame her. She even suggested Zahra might have run away and hurt herself in the process. When police asked her to clarify, she shifted again, this time implying that Zahra had been into some things online, possibly speaking to strangers. The story collapsed under its own weight. Zahra was deaf, isolated, and had no known access to technology. At this point, Elisa was asked to come in for formal questioning.
In the interview room, investigators adopted a calm, methodical approach. They didn't accuse her directly. They didn't play their full hand. Instead, they laid out what they could prove: that Zahra hadn't been seen in public in over a month, that no school could verify her enrollment, that the clothing found in the washer had blood on it, that the ransom-style note in the car appeared to have been written inside the house. Elisa sat motionless for much of the interview. Then, slowly, she began to speak, but not about Zahra. Instead, she admitted that she had written the ransom note herself. She claimed it was part of a plot unrelated to Zahra's disappearance, an effort to retaliate against someone she had personal problems with. The explanation made no sense. It was incoherent, but it was a start, an opening. Investigators pressed further. They began asking about Zahra's last confirmed activities, the last meal she ate, the last TV show she watched, the last bath she took. Elisa's answers were vague. She claimed Zahra had eaten cereal 2 days before the report, but she couldn't say what kind, or what time of day, or what bowl she used. These weren't the lapses of a distracted parent. They were signs of someone lying about a child she no longer had access to. At that point, a search warrant was executed for digital devices in the home. Elisa's computer, her phone, and even Adam's work-issued phone were collected. Analysts began the painstaking process of pulling data, search histories, text messages, deleted files, cloud-stored photos. Meanwhile, Elisa's mood began to shift in the interviews. On the third day of questioning, she broke down, but the truth she offered wasn't whole. It came in fragments. She didn't confess to murder. She said she had panicked, that something happened and she didn't want Adam to find out. She claimed Zahra had died accidentally and that she had handled it wrong. Investigators asked where Zahra's body was. Elisa looked away. She said, "I don't remember exactly." When Elisa Baker claimed that Zahra's death had been an accident, investigators knew she was withholding the truth. But she had, intentionally or not, admitted something critical: that Zahra was no longer alive, and that she, Elisa, had played a direct role in concealing that fact. Now police needed to find Zahra. Within 48 hours of Elisa's partial confession, a massive multi-agency search was launched across Caldwell and Catawba counties. The terrain was wide and wooded, dense forests, creeks, rural backroads where trash and debris often sat undisturbed for years. Search and rescue teams used canine units, ground-penetrating radar, helicopters, and grid mapping software. Volunteers scoured drainage ditches and wooded trails. Detectives returned to Elisa in custody and pressed her to reveal where Zahra's body could be found. At first, she said she couldn't remember, that it had been a while. Eventually, through a deal with prosecutors for reduced charges in exchange for cooperation, she offered a sickening map, not to a single burial site, but to multiple locations. Because Zahra hadn't been buried, she had been dismembered.
Elisa admitted that after Zahra died, under circumstances she continued to vaguely call an accident, she panicked. She waited for Adam to leave for work, then took Zahra's body and began to dispose of it in pieces. The locations were far apart, chosen to evade discovery. A creek bed in Caldwell County, a rural turnoff near Dudley Shoals, and a grassy area behind a plastic-lined drainage pipe. Search teams were stunned. Over the next several days, they began to recover partial remains, a prosthetic leg identified as Zahra's, found off Christie Road in Caldwell County, a bone fragment that forensic anthropologists confirmed belonged to a child. Then, a torso, heavily decomposed. Not all parts were found. Some were likely destroyed by animals or lost to the elements. But what was found was enough. DNA confirmed the remains were Zahra's. The prosthetic leg, serial numbered and uniquely fitted, left no doubt. The horror deepened with the forensic reports. The bones showed no signs of pre-existing trauma, like injuries consistent with the fall, which would support Elisa's accident story, but they did suggest possible post-mortem dismemberment, done not by an amateur in a moment of panic, but in a disturbingly methodical way. A saw had been used. The cuts were deliberate. Meanwhile, Elisa stuck to her narrative. She claimed Zahra had been sick, had died in her sleep or after falling, and that she only panicked because she feared Adam would blame her. Investigators didn't believe her, but without eyewitnesses or a full body for autopsy, proving the exact cause of death was difficult. Still, circumstantial evidence painted a chilling picture. Digital forensic teams uncovered online searches on Elisa's computer in the weeks prior to Zahra's death, including phrases like how to dispose of a body, dismemberment after death, and household chemicals to mask decomposition. There were also chat logs with acquaintances that hinted at Zahra being a burden. Elisa had even joked, weeks before the murder, that she didn't want to deal with that kid anymore. One acquaintance told detectives that Elisa had confided something strange in early September, saying that Zahra was getting in the way of her marriage, that she was too much trouble. When paired with the timeline of Zahra's last known public appearance, a school visit in early September 2010, the emerging theory was devastatingly clear. Zahra had likely been dead for nearly a month before she was ever reported missing. While all this was unfolding, Adam Baker remained under heavy scrutiny. Many in the public believed he had to be involved. How could a father not know that his child was missing? But every digital trace, phone records, work logs, GPS data, showed that Adam had been out of the home for most of the time Elisa would have had to commit and cover up the crime. Investigators found no evidence that he had participated in Zahra's murder or the disposal of her remains. However, he wasn't off the hook entirely.
Adam had turned a blind eye to the abuse. He had ignored the signs, accepted weak excuses, and left Zahra vulnerable in the care of a woman he barely knew. The court of public opinion was unforgiving, even if the law didn't hold him criminally accountable. Meanwhile, Elisa was officially charged, not with murder at first, but with obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and felony desecration of a human body. Authorities needed time to build a stronger case, one that could prove beyond reasonable doubt that she had intentionally caused Zahra's death, not just mishandled it afterward. And time was running out. Public pressure was mounting. Zahra's face was now on every news channel. Candlelight vigils were held. Her relatives in Australia were devastated, shocked that they hadn't known, hadn't been able to intervene. The question echoing in every headline was simple and haunting. How could this have happened to a child who had already survived so much? Elisa Baker was already facing several serious charges: obstruction of justice, desecration of human remains, and writing a fraudulent ransom note. But what investigators really needed, and what the public demanded, was a murder conviction. That meant more than implication. It meant intent. It meant proof that Zahra had been deliberately killed.
To get there, detectives leaned hard into interrogation. Elisa was no stranger to deception, but she wasn't a skilled liar either, not under pressure. In the early sessions, she played the role of misunderstood mother. She said Zahra was difficult and that she never meant to hurt her. But when pressed on specifics, the timing, the methods, the condition of the body, her story crumbled. She claimed Zahra had been sick the night she died, that she found her cold and unresponsive in the attic room. When asked why she didn't call 911, she muttered something about fear of Adam's anger, fear of going to prison. But the tone was flat. The remorse seemed shallow. There were no tears, no moments of raw humanity, just vague, circular answers and excuses. Detectives switched tactics. They presented her with evidence, not just Zahra's remains, but the forensic data, the bloodied clothing, the digital search history, the contradictions in her 911 call. Still, Elisa didn't confess. Instead, she pivoted again, this time suggesting Adam had something to do with it. She implied he had been abusive, that he might have snapped, that she had helped cover things up to protect him. But her story didn't hold. Every timeline disproved her claim. Surveillance footage showed Adam at work during the days Zahra was likely killed. Her coworkers confirmed his presence. His phone pinged miles away from the house hours before and after Zahra vanished. Elisa had no answer for this. Each new version of her story was weaker than the last. At one point, in a moment of agitation, Elisa lashed out during questioning. "I did what I had to do," she snapped. "She wouldn't listen. She pushed me too far." The room fell quiet. Investigators didn't interrupt. They let her fill the silence. But she quickly backtracked, mumbling that she hadn't meant that way, that she was talking about disciplining Zahra, not harming her. But they had heard it, and so had the audio recorder. That moment, that flicker of anger, would be cataloged, transcribed, and presented later in legal filings as an indication of motive. Investigators continued to gather more.
Back at the lab, forensic techs were still analyzing digital evidence. One breakthrough came in the form of deleted text messages, fragments Elisa had attempted to erase, but were recovered through data recovery tools. In them, she complained about Zahra's behavior to a friend, saying things like, "She makes everything harder. She's not even mine. Why is she my problem?" And more disturbingly, "Some days I swear I could just throw her away and not look back." These were dated just weeks before Zahra's disappearance. The friend never responded directly to those texts, likely dismissing them as venting, but in hindsight, they showed a progression. Not just resentment, but dehumanization. Zahra was no longer a stepdaughter to Elisa. She was an obstacle, a nuisance, a burden Elisa had no emotional investment in. This mattered. It gave prosecutors something crucial: premeditation. But still missing was a cause of death. With Zahra's remains badly decomposed and incomplete, medical examiners couldn't say definitively whether she had been strangled, suffocated, struck, or poisoned. No soft tissue remained. Toxicology was impossible. This severely weakened the murder charge, not the theory, but the court-admissible proof. Still, the DA was determined. They prepared for a charge of second-degree murder built on circumstantial evidence, behavioral patterns, and Elisa's own shifting confessions. It was risky. Juries often want clear-cut answers, but this case had something more powerful than lab results: the horror of what was done afterward. As the legal teams assembled, public outrage intensified. Child welfare services were scrutinized for missing the warning signs. Several reports had been made anonymously in the months prior to Zahra's death, concerns about bruises, hunger, excessive absences from school. Each report had been met with a brief check-in, a form filed, and no further action. Why didn't anyone push harder? Why wasn't there a medical follow-up? Why was Elisa, a woman with a criminal history including past drug charges and fraud, allowed to homeschool and isolate a medically fragile child with no oversight? These were questions that didn't just haunt the court, they haunted the town. Vigils turned into protests. Zahra's name became a symbol not just of abuse, but of systemic abandonment. A 10-year-old child who had beaten cancer and overcome disabilities had died not because of one failure, but because of many, each one small, each one excusable, until it was too late. As the legal teams assembled, the district attorney's office knew the burden they were up against. This wasn't a straightforward case with security footage or eyewitnesses. There was no definitive cause of death, and the most crucial forensic material, Zahra's internal organs, skin, soft tissue, had decomposed or destroyed. The autopsy could not prove how she had died. But what they did have was a compelling mosaic: damning behavioral evidence, digital records, and Elisa's own damning words. The case wouldn't rest on science alone. It would rest on intent and aftermath. They began assembling the timeline.
Zahra's last confirmed public sighting was early September 2010. After that, no neighbors saw her, no teachers reported contact, and she made no visits to her medical specialists. In contrast, Elisa's internet search activity increased, with terms involving body disposal, chemicals to mask smell, and legal consequences for accidental deaths. They linked this timeline to the ransom note Elisa wrote in early October, which investigators now knew was a distraction. She had used a fire set in a vehicle to draw attention away from the home. It was sloppy, yes, but strategic. It delayed the investigation just enough. Then came the kicker: Elisa's repeated, shifting confessions. While she never outright said, "I killed Zahra," she made damning implications. At one point, she stated Zahra had been sick, and after it happened, she was afraid to call for help. In another version, she said she messed up and didn't know what to do. At no point did she describe CPR, any medical attempt, or even panic in the usual sense. What she did describe was planning, how she cut up Zahra's body and used her vehicle to drop pieces in separate counties, how she returned to clean, how she burned items in the yard. These were actions that spoke louder than any confession. Prosecutors decided they had a path: second-degree murder built on reckless disregard for human life, paired with charges of obstruction of justice, desecration of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and identity fraud for the false ransom note. They also charged Elisa as a habitual felon, which would increase sentencing automatically due to her long criminal history, prior convictions for check fraud, drug possession, and larceny. But prosecutors faced a dilemma. Without a clear cause of death, going to trial was risky. A jury might doubt the murder charge, or worse, believe Elisa's accidental death narrative and convict only on lesser charges. So they proposed a deal: avoid trial in exchange for a guilty plea to second-degree murder and a long sentence with no chance of parole. Elisa initially balked. She wanted immunity from murder charges entirely. She pushed for a plea to obstruction only. Prosecutors refused. Eventually, her own lawyers, recognizing the strength of the circumstantial case and the public fury surrounding her name, convinced her that a trial could result in life without parole, or worse. By September 2011, nearly a full year after Zahra's death, Elisa Baker agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder and 6 additional felony charges. In a closed hearing, she finally admitted, emotionless, that Zahra had died under her care, that she panicked, and that she disposed of the body in a way that was wrong. No full confession came. There was no apology, no visible remorse, but the plea was accepted.
The court sentenced her to 14 to 18 years for second-degree murder, additional time ranging from 5 to 10 years collectively for the obstruction, desecration, and fraud charges. Total sentence, a minimum of 18 years, with maximums pushing past 24 due to habitual offender status. Elisa was immediately transferred to the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women.
She will be eligible for parole no earlier than 2029, though every review thus far has suggested early release is unlikely. As of 2025, Elisa Baker remains incarcerated. She has made no further public statements, declined interviews, and has not expressed remorse in any documented setting. She remains in protective custody within the prison system due to threats from other inmates. Adam Baker, Zahra's biological father, returned to Australia after the trial. No charges were ever brought against him, though civil and public criticism followed him for years. He maintains that he was manipulated and controlled by Elisa, blind to the abuse, but never complicit. Zahra's remains were returned to her Australian relatives and buried in a private ceremony. A plaque at the cemetery reads simply, "Zahra Clare Baker, a smile that changed the world." Her case triggered multiple policy changes in North Carolina, including stricter oversight of children removed from school for homeschooling, mandatory follow-ups on anonymous abuse tips, and background checks for legal guardians not biologically related to children in their care.